Thank you all for returning for our panel. We have all of our wonderful speakers that we heard today back on with us. Panelists, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and turn your cameras on, please. Dave Prouty is going to ask questions. Panelists, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you would like to respond to it. After our panelists have a chance to respond to the question, we are going to open it up so that everybody can participate. We're asking all participants, if you would like to answer the question, go ahead and put your hand up. You are also welcome to put any questions and comments into the chat and we will read them for you. Dave?
Sure. Okay. The first question for the panelist is, what are the biggest challenges to ensuring bat welfare? And Dr. Wellingham, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, it's up because it won't let me turn on my camera. It says,
okay.
It says the host has, the host is at, oh, there we go. Now we go. There we go. You can't start your video. Am I here? Let's see. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Any panelists want to take that on first? Brian?
Can you please repeat the question? We've had some technical difficulties.
Sure, I sure can. So the question is, what are the biggest challenges to ensuring bat welfare?
Well, to me, that would be making sure they have adequate flight space, that all centers that house bats have enough flight space, not just flying from wall to wall, but continuous free flight, and also removing bats from the pet trade. Those are two of the biggest challenges for bats, of course, as well as enrichment, which we talked about quite a bit today.
Okay, thank you. Brian, you had your hand up?
You're muted.
You need to unmute yourself, Brian.
Oops,
And-
I thought I was on. Okay, just
There
sorry,
we
real quick. It was just going back to the 5 domains, making sure that we are looking at the 5 domains when it comes to bats. And I know many people during the talks have discussed it when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to the environment, mental well-being. I think if we're looking at the 5 domains and ensuring that the bats in our care are receiving adequate care based on those domains, I think that's one of the biggest challenges with bats, is making sure that each facility that has these animals is giving the appropriate care based on what the 5 domains are.
Okay, thank you. Lori?
And I'll add to that, just to this, that from a USDA standpoint, probably 2 of the more common welfare issues that we've seen have been sanitation issues and then transport. I think it is not a simple matter to transport bats over a long distance. So I think that very careful planning should go into every transport, regardless of the length of the transport, and the longer transports are even more challenging. So I think those are important points that we see from the USDA standpoint.
Hey, thank you. Anyone else? All right, next question. Oh, and again, I open it up to the audience. So if you have a question or you want to comment, please raise your hand and I will unmute you. Yeah. And Randy, you're unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, is there a way to humanely exclude bats from buildings? I think I've heard that this is a real problem with juvenile bat colonies that I'd like to hear some more about that if I could.
I'll be happy to answer that one. There are Fortunately, most of the states in the US do protect bat colonies from exclusions. We're talking about our native bat colonies from exclusions during maternity season. There are 7 states, Texas included, unfortunately, that do not have any strict regulations on whether or not insectivorous bats can be excluded during maternity season. And when they are excluded, that means humane exclusion involves putting up a one-way door. So the bats that are in a building causing issues can leave, but then they can't get back in. So they can humanely be evicted. The issue is when it's done during maternity season and there are flightless babies left behind in the roost, those babies will slowly starve, as well as mothers trying to get back in to get to their pups who are crying for them. And then a lot of mothers will end up grounded on the outside of the buildings, where they will end up possibly being picked up by children or pets. So it's a really serious issue, and it needs to be addressed in all 50 states. And fortunately, most states, though, do have some protection for bats during maternity season. It's just those 7 states that kind of need to catch up on that.
I'll say this, in Florida, so we do have, maternity season. I just got an email from FWC last week, and they're interested in gathering information on places that they know where they have bats, because there's a concern that the maternity season that we have here might not be long enough. And perhaps we need to be looking into March, and I'm not going to get in a whole warm weather comment, or, but what we're seeing is bats are being born earlier than they normally were. So I kind of thought that was pretty cool for FWC to say, okay, let's look at not only Luby, but places where there's known bat colonies outside of caves. So they're looking at bat houses, places that have these, and do we need to, let's gather baseline data. Let's look to see if we may have to extend our maternity season, because it seems that the pups are being born earlier and earlier than that kind of April 15th, with the start of maternity season here in Florida. So that was good news, at least, to see that there's a step in the right direction if we need to change some of those dates.
I completely agree with that. Also, maternity season lasts much longer than a lot of people actually say that it does. In fact, most insectivorous bats aren't completely weaned until mid-August and aren't flying on their own until early September. So the exclusion season should be probably made longer, from say March to September at least, in order to protect all the different species and all of the different areas of the US.
Okay, Patrice.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of piggyback on those excellent comments. Thank you, Amanda, as well, and Brian. One of the things we also need to think about in the wildlife community as a whole is we need to work with our partners in public health, because when it becomes a situation where, bats in the attic, for example, they don't want them coming into the living space. And oftentimes, this is in obviously private homes that I'm reflecting on, is that the homeowner is going to call the, person that they get first on, when they Google search somebody and they go look for somebody who's going to exclude animals. It may not be done humanely, number one, and it may be, to Amanda's point, done inappropriately during the wrong time of the season. But the public health folks are going to be conscientious about not wanting to have bats coming into that living space. So there's a messaging I think that we need to coordinate on, is if indeed there are, let's say, bats in someone's attic, whether it's in a home or commercial business, how can we also make sure that we're trying to seal up those gaps, for example, right, to protect that living space for people while we allow those bats to finish, let's say, nursing their pups and weaning their pups, so that once it is appropriate to try to do a one-way door exclusion, that everybody ends up, win-win for everybody. And that's what I try to work on as a veterinarian as well, is having that conversation with our public health counterparts to make sure that they're not just doing something that is, their mission and automatic is just get rid of the bats. And we're trying to sort of marry those two things together, if that helps.
That's a very good point. I agree with that completely. One of the things that we tell people is until maternity season is over, to at least find any cracks or crevices in their ceilings where the animals could come through, block all of those off, but don't block the areas where the mothers are able to go in and out and access their babies. The issue is when a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm just going to wait until nightfall and then just block all the holes. And when they do that, that leaves the mothers, of course, trying to get in, and also leaves the babies trying to find a way out. They're not going to just stay there and starve. They are going to start crawling through the walls and the ceilings. And I can't tell you how many calls we've had about people who have ended up tearing down their ceilings just to get rid of the sad, tiny little dead bodies that are in the ceiling in order to get rid of the smell. So, so waiting and doing the right thing and the humane thing is actually what's best for human health as well, because you cause it's a public health hazard when they're blocked in, period. It causes an enormous amount of issues, not just with bats coming in, but also with bats being downed outside.
Correct. And to feed into your comments, first of all, folks like you, Amanda, and others who are out there doing a lot of public education is really important, because other times people may find a bat, let's say, in their house in the middle of winter, and what they do is they open the door and they let it go. And
Yeah.
so we know that that's wrong, but the public doesn't necessarily realize, oh, they just want to save the bat. So they take them out of the attic where they find them, or they take them out of the living space, and then they just open the door in the middle of winter. So all of the public education that World Bank Sanctuary and others are doing is really important. We just need to continue to do that. And that may also come down to APHIS, Center for Animal Welfare. I mean, we should all be part of this discussion and this solution together, and talking to our respective counterparts, both in public health and animal health, but getting that message out there and getting that public education. And thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have a caller on. Corky, you're unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I kind of have a twofold question, both of which are about long-term caging for insectivorous bats that are handicapped. We talked a lot about bats needing sufficient flight space, but an amputee is obviously not flying. And my experience is that when I put them in too large a cage, they can't find their food or their water, or they try to fly and injure themselves. And then tied to caging and the insect bats, I also was thinking about the cleaning, and how when we thoroughly clean, we're also removing the markings and that the bats have created themselves. And I'm wondering how that affects their emotional well-being, their social interactions.
Anybody like to take that? It's on the panel.
I'm sorry. What was it? Can you repeat the very first part of the question one more time? Hello?
I think I can help with that if
Hold on a
if she
second. Yeah, go
dropped
ahead.
off.
Oh, there we
Um,
go. I was muted. Sorry, Amanda.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay.
So my first part of my question was about caging for amputees, for long-term ambassador amputee animals.
Yeah, we do have amputees here, and we do have special accommodations for them. One of the things is they're housed in a smaller enclosure, of course, and the floors are always padded just because of the propensity of an amputee to fall. I have noticed that what they will do is they adapt just like a dog with 3 legs. They will turn around, and rather than trying to climb up forwards or face up, they'll climb up backwards using their legs. And so they do adapt really well. But as long as you have a lot of padded, like we use fabric roosting pouches, a padded floor on the enclosure. And so everything is really easy for them to reach. And going back to feeding bats on the floor, what I should have clarified a little bit better in my earlier presentation is that we do feed bats on the floor, such as amputees, but we don't feed any flighted animals on the floor. So anybody who has special needs, or like the geriatric ward that we have, or our insectivorous bat enclosure where the bats are healing from injuries, as well as amputees, they are fed on the floor as well as on the walls with magnetic rocks that go against the wall that hold little stainless dishes. So we do feed them on the floor. It's just the flighted bats should have all of their food within easy reach on the ceiling.
Thank you. So I do have another question. This is for Amanda. Since Bat World is located in the path of totality, were there any behavior changes in the bats during the eclipse?
Actually, we put on we have 5 live bat cams that run 24/7, and I turned on night vision as well as volume to see if they noticed any difference, and they really didn't. We do come out and, snag some food, but they do that anyway during the day. They also come out when it's cloudy and fly around like, oh, goody, nighttime came early. But then they go right back when the sun comes up. So
Okay,
I'm just,
thank you. Was there another comment?
oh, no, I was just saying, just as an aside, I also went outside and sat with our rescued goats, and they could have cared less.
Okay. Thank you. Hold just a minute.
Okay, we have a question that was written in. Has anyone successfully reintroduced small bats back to the colony after being removed for medical reasons? We have Jamaicans and Sebas together, and they always attack a bat that was reintroduced, even if they lived with them before. Panelists, anyone want to take this one? Amanda?
Yeah, yes, I'll take it. Well, I've never experienced that. We do neuter. And the question was about neutering, correct? And then returning to the colony, because it was a little fuzzy.
It's any medical condition where the animal had to be
Oh,
removed.
any medical condition, right? No, we've never seen that, so I'm not sure why that would occur. But it seems like it's got to be something else environmental that's causing that. Maybe lack of flight space, because if there is a lot of flight space, and they don't tend to be aggressive like that, especially if they're all neutered. We do neuter all the males, and that helps quite a bit.
Okay, and Jim, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I would say that there are some species differences between that too. I mean, and I think philostomatids, I don't want to overgeneralize, but they tend to be less good about going away and coming back. An extreme example is a Philostomus histatus, which is a carnivorous philostomatid, and when we would reintroduce those to when we would reintroduce those back into the group after a fairly short exam or something like that, they would be fairly savage about it. So they're significant. If you're trying to introduce 2 Pteropus together, it's very, very different introducing 2 Vamps versus introducing 2 Pumelus. There are some species differences there.
Okay, thank you. And we have another caller. Kenny, you're now unmuted.
Yes, I have a question about bat houses. I'm a public health environmentalist, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are on bat houses, because we have a lot of homeowners who want to get bat houses to try to get the bats away from their house, and also summer camps. Inevitably every year there are bats that get into some of the cabins at the camps. What are your all's thoughts on the bat houses?
That's something that Luby's really been a part of for the past 7-8 years. I mean, our whole history has always been overworld fruit bats, but about 7-8 years ago, we started working with an environmental firm, and we got to learn about echolocation, monitoring, call analysis, and then we started taking around bat houses. And to date, we've put up 146 from mid-Georgia down to South Florida, and we've had a lot of success with our houses. I can say with dome hunters, by the way, so we've had to deal with this. Make sure you talk with the HOA because we've run into some problems. But we've had a lot of success with our bat houses, and the the free tails that are in Florida don't live in the caves here. It's weird because, you go to Texas or any of these other states where they're at, and they live in the caves, but FWC did surveys of every cave in Florida. Not one, they didn't find one free-tailed bat. So, but there are large populations here in Florida, and you see them in a lot of buildings. I mean, we just had the discussion about bats in maternity season and getting them out of buildings. So one of the things that we've really been successful at is our bat houses here in Florida. It took us a long time to get it right, but we love putting them up. The homeowners and the clients seem to really like them. And on average, it takes us about 5.5 months to get a colony. It's been 2.5 years for some of them. It's been 2 weeks for the others, but the clients seem to be happy. The bats use the houses. And the longer the time goes on, we're seeing these bat colonies stay year round instead of coming in, maybe staying a couple of weeks or coming into the fall, winter time and leaving in the spring. We're seeing more and more staying in the houses, especially the bigger ones, and forming maternity colonies, which is great. So Luby's had a lot of success with houses, and we'd be happy to ever answer any questions people may have about bat houses. But again, Florida's going to be different. We face them southeast here, and because Florida is such a large state, if we're going to be putting them in South Florida, it's going to be a lighter shade of brown than it would be here in North Central Florida. So there's just a lot of intricacies about where to place them. I was building bat houses up in the 90s at Penn State University, and we were staining them black and putting them on the side of the building facing east. So there's really a lot to it. But at least here in Florida, we've done a pretty decent job of getting colonies and making it's been a win-win across the board.
Okay, and I see Amanda's your hands up.
Yes, the only thing I would add to that is that pup catchers are ideal for bat houses. They keep a lot of bat houses may get overheated. The bats will actually come down and hang on the screen to get a little bit warmer, or excuse me, cooler, and that helps the colony survive. Any pup they fall can climb back in where they would be out of the reach of children and pets. The other thing that I would suggest is that for homeowners who want to put up a bat house, that they may use our locator rescuer map. That's an entire US map on finding rehabilitators, and just kind of find out who is close to them in case they do find a bat that's grounded on the ground. They can contact that local rehabilitator and get the proper care for it, and also learn how to gather any grounded bats up safely by using gloves and a cloth and a box, etc. Those are the things that health-wise, if you're looking at it from that perspective, that would be good. Just something to do ahead of time, just to make sure that you have everything in place.
Okay, thank you. We do have another question for the panel. What can we do better to improve bat survivability in light of the public's fear and misunderstanding of them? Anybody want to take that one?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Sure, I can repeat it. It says, what can we do better to improve bat survivability in light of the public's fear and misunderstanding of them? And I think Patrice, your hand is up first.
Well, sure. I'll just start, and then Amanda and others can probably do better. I know that every year we have something called Bat Week, which coming from the federal government, at least, we get involved at USDA and USGS and Fish and Wildlife Service, but it is Bat Week, and that takes actually a full year to consider the kind of educational programs. There's actually educational kits that can go out to schools to help teachers bring that subject into the classroom. So there's lots of educational activities, certainly, of course, around Halloween, and when bats, it's around the late part of October, coincidentally, right? So a lot of it is public education. As much as COVID or SARS-CoV-2, at one point in time looked like it was more dire for bats, and everybody was worried that, bats flying around, they were going to die from COVID. We tried to sort of negate that idea because, first of all, the science wasn't telling us that that was the case, certainly not in North America. But it also was a teachable moment. So never underestimate teachable moments. Even if it sounds dire at the front end of the story, you can actually turn it around and use it as an educational opportunity. So I was just going to promote the sort of Bat Week concept, where we put out lots of educational materials about pollinating bats, agave, everybody likes tequila, right? All of those kinds of fun things. I'll hand it over to Amanda and others if they want to continue along that theme.
Well, I would like to say that early on, and I keep going back to the 80s, especially in my presentation, but when I found that first little bat, everyone thought I was a complete nut, that I was trying to help a bat, because back then, 90% of the people out there absolutely despised bats, and maybe 10% were actually educated. But thank goodness for social media, for the internet, for Bat Week and all those good things. More and more people are knowing. And if I had to list percentages again, I would say that 90% of the people now know or think positively about bats, and 10% don't. So reaching those 10% is not as hard as it used to be. And mainly if you see something negative about bat on social media, you can go and correct them, send them links to the right information, etc. And that goes a long way. So I have to say the internet can be a beautiful thing in the way that it helps to save animals, and even around the world. We're able to help bats around the world through the internet, and it also can be an awful thing because of the misconceptions people try to spread. But yeah, I think just basically being proactive is a really big thing with helping bats and their image.
Yeah, I'll just say this real quick. Effective education awareness campaigns. I mean, for those of the folks that got to see my presentation earlier, like I said, for years, I tried to talk about all the conservation programs we're doing and really try to get folks interested. But an 8-second video of a bat yawning and sneezing, and that really got a lot of attention. It went viral, but to see the comments about how people's minds and perceptions of bats change was just an 8-second video. When I was trying for years to put stuff on there about conservation, everything. So whatever it takes, if it's changing minds, whatever facility you're working at, if you can just get any information out there, it just makes a big, big difference, and it changes minds and feelings about bats.
On that same note, it's amazing, like what Brian said on what little thing that humans can compare to themselves will actually bring about a huge change for bats. Because people want to compare themselves or compare their animals to themselves. And so if they know an animal smiles or laughs or tickles or even has a big butt, it helps a lot. And in that, we had a free-tailed bat who developed some significant little buns after he was trying to plump up for hibernation, and his name was Harold. We just showed a picture of Harold's butt on social media, and it went out to millions, and millions of people joined our page, and they were able to learn more about bats. I mean, not millions of people didn't join the page, but saw the post and came to our page and were able to learn more about bats. So a yawn or anything like that, or a butt can really help. And now what we have, and it generated all of the other bat groups around the world, even Australia and everywhere. Actually, we do a thing called Bat Butt Friday, and everybody shows little fuzzy butts and the butt cheeks, and it really does reach people in an odd way, but it helps to educate as well. So yay, bat butts.
Okay, thank you. And another caller, Corky, go right ahead. You're unmuted.
Yeah, thanks. So I had my question was two-parted, and we got one part answered. I wanted to go back to the cleaning of cages and the feeling of completely removing all of their bedding, which then removes anything that they've marked, and how that might affect them emotionally.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Well, and I think maybe when you're talking about marking, you might be referencing free tails and their gular gland, because that's one of the main ways that they do mark. And I'm not sure about big browns. I've not seen them marking anything except for maybe with urine. We do change out their roosting pouches daily, and with free tails or little boys who are feeling lovely or loved or wanting to love, they just go right back to remarking a new pouch. And if you don't change it, it becomes pretty unbearable smell-wise. So we, every single day, we change out every roosting pouch. We wipe down all of the walls with alcohol, wash out all of the dishes and everything, change the padding on the floor. It has a little padded floor in the cave. And so it's all done every single day, and it doesn't affect them at all. They still have their regular behavior. They still go right back to marking. So I think it's always a good thing to just keep it as clean as you possibly can, while also keeping it as natural as far as enrichment as you possibly can.
Okay, thank you. And Annalise, you have your hand up?
Yeah, kind of basically the same thing. With our bats, I feel like they end up enjoying the stuff that's not marked, honestly, more than the stuff that they've already marked before. They get super excited when there's something new that they get to go make stinky. When they get locked in because it's cold overnight, the first thing the boys do is go rub on everything around the enclosure to make sure that their stink is still there, or if it got taken away, that it's put back there. I definitely think that the enrichment of being able to remark things definitely seems to be way more enriching than maybe it not being there. They definitely love getting those new things that they get to mark all over. So I don't think taking that away necessarily is really hurting them.
Okay, thanks, Annalise. We do have another question for the panel. What is the best way to assess if there's enough space in an enclosure based on species and the number of bats contained within?
We go by the AZA, the bat tag guidelines. That's what we always tell people, although Luby's guidelines are even more strict than that. But that's what we usually go by whenever we tell people. And I know with small bats, you don't see it very often. I've seen a lot of cramped enclosures, but we base it off of those tag guidelines. But again, Luby's are even more strict than that.
Okay, thank you. Amanda?
Yes, I kind of mentioned that earlier in my other presentation, but we base it on the wing size. Say, for instance, as an example, if you have 20 Egyptian fruit bats and they basically have a 2-foot wingspan, then you need it to be at least 12 times the size of the wingspan in square feet, which would mean about a 24 by 24 square foot cage, or 560 something square feet. I can't remember exactly. But so if it's based on wing size, then you're pretty much going to get an appropriate size for the bats to have enough of an area to fly unencumbered, loads of enrichment in there, and just loads of space to actually fly. And of course, for smaller bat species with, say, an 8-inch or a 1-foot wingspan, the enclosure side would be smaller. But and you want to increase it for any new bats added, you need to increase it a certain percentage to make sure that you have enough space for everyone.
Okay, thank you. And we have another caller. Kim, go ahead and ask your question.
I have many questions, so I'll try to combine a couple about rabies. I'm surprised to hear that silver-haired bats transmit rabies more frequently, or in higher percentages. I would have thought that the mostly solitary species transmit rabies less. And so I'm curious if there's any thought about why the silver-haired bats show up like that. And then the second part of that is that for the bats that have been found with rabies antibodies, or whatever it is that they've been found with that indicates that they have survived a rabies infection, do we know if it is a particular strain of rabies that's maybe like a less destructive, or might there be a chance that some bats could develop defenses against all rabies strains?
So they're close enough that you get pretty good antigenic cross-reactivity, but they're not the same. I mean, you can if you line the genes up and do phylogeny, there's diversity in rabies viruses, and they're not, the risk is like when you look at the number of people who died, for example, from the strain that is adapted for raccoons, there are 3 human deaths. 2 of them were organ transplant recipients, and the third was a lymphoma patient. And there's a serosurvey of raccoon hunters in Florida, none of whom claim to be either dead or or vaccinated, and 20% of them were seropositive. That doesn't mean it's something you should ever dick around with, but it does mean that there are significant differences between different rabies strains, and as far as how good they are at setting up in a human and causing fatal disease. Well, once you've got clinical signs, it's bad. It's just a question whether it's going to get to that point or not, and you shouldn't roll those dice.
And thank you. Patrice?
Yeah, well, definitely not going to disagree with Dr. Wellen on that one. But I also think about the epidemiology part of this story. You know, when we start collecting data, I mean, I live in Maryland, and for many years, I've certainly worked with my colleagues at the state public health and even state wildlife health side of the equation. And from the public health perspective, they're only going to report out what they get. So we have to be careful of, you know, what bats are being submitted for testing. And I'll just speak at least about Maryland, is the ones that are being found in living spaces, which would be more the colonial bats. So it, you know, in the days when we actually had little browns, you know, or big browns, less those silverhairs, because they are the ones that are out on the trees and maybe not as much in quote frequent contact with people. So, and to your point about, you know, raccoon rabies, pretty much people know when they're bitten by a raccoon or a coyote, because recently we had a positive coyote here in Maryland that attacked 2 women and was killed and tested. So on those, you know, mesocarnivores, you're pretty, you know, well aware that you just got bitten. You're not necessarily aware that you might have been bitten by a bat. So again, from the public health perspective, if it's found in living space, unfortunately, they more than likely will kill the bat and test it, even if it turns out to be negative, just so you don't have to worry about post-exposure vaccination for the people in the house. So I'm trying to put some perspective on what we know by the literature, what we know by the genetics and genomics that Dr. Wellen talked about, which thank you for doing that. It's okay. But also just the reality of where are the reports coming from, you know, and mostly it's based on where people have been exposed by potential rabid animals. So what I see in Maryland is mostly big brown bats, or again, in the days when we actually had more little brown bats, but the ones that are being found in living spaces that are submitted for rabies testing. So I think that the data can be skewed, I think is the moral of my story, only because it's what you get. You know, having
Yeah,
worked in
I think
laboratories
that's-
years ago, right? It's what you get in, not necessarily what's really happening in the real world.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good example of Aptesicus is a great example of a bat species that has a very high contact rate with people, and yet that strain of rabies not really associated. You know, don't dick around with it. Don't take that as it's okay to go play with it. But the contact rate between humans and silverhairs is pretty low, so it is, and these strains are genetically distinct, and you can look at them, and you know, in experimental studies with them, people often pull out the silver-haired strain to get good disease reproduction in models. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question for the panel. Does anyone think trying to rehabilitate white-nosed bats is detrimental in the bigger picture due to the highly contagious nature of the fungus?
Well, I mean, I guess that depends on your big picture. You know, if you're talking about like Indiana myotis or something like that, you know, the truth is that, as I said earlier, evolution has been a series of selective sweeps. And at this point, we're looking at white nose coming through and doing what it's doing to populations. And about the only thing that's going to change that is shorter hibernations because we've screwed up the climate. You know, but we're gonna see the survivors survive, and it's frustrating, but I don't think we're gonna have a reasonable way to stop this from sweeping through. We're just gonna document it.
Okay, Amanda?
Yes, I do know that white nose syndrome bats have been taken into captivity in a study, and they did recover, and they did go on to bear offspring. So I think it might be interesting to see if the offspring maybe had some kind of immunity to white nose, but I don't, you know, that's the only thing I can offer on that, is that they have recovered in captivity. Of course, they weren't releasable because of the damage done to their bodies, but it is interesting that they could recover in captivity with the proper nutrition and housing and care, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. Patrice?
Yeah, just a quick comment on top of that. So this is another one of those moments where wildlife rehabilitators, as you're probably aware, are permitted by the state wildlife agencies, right? They have their sort of permits to conduct these rehabilitation activities. And that is also a relationship that we've been building over many years is to, again, be partners with the state wildlife agencies. I think it's important, that's the data sharing, I think that Amanda was talking about, is should some of those animals be received, and, you may not see the fungus, because that's, again, maybe it's a cryophylic fungus. In other words, when it's out of the cold, you don't actually see the little fuzzy stuff on their face anymore. You might just see the wing damage, particularly as they're emerging after the wintertime and they've been infected during hibernation. That's when you start to see a lot of the damage to the wings and to the skin. So if that's all you're seeing and you're trying to sort of treat with some suggestion that that's might be what it is, that's the relationship they have with the state wildlife agencies to collect that data. If the rehabilitator is permitted to continue to work with those white nose syndrome positive animals, then try to see if there's, treatments or just nutritional support, anything to try to heal them. And the better thing is to let them go, okay? Because the white nose is already out there in multiple states now, unfortunately, more than 30 states. So that knowing that it's spread all the way through the East Coast to the central states, it's obviously out in Washington State and maybe in California by now. We've been following that for many years. It's a sad thing, that's true. And it may be that it's going to take multiple generations for some type of genetic resilience to set in and allow some of those animals. They've seen some evidence, like up in New York State, and a few of the original states that had white nose, a decade ago, they're starting to see maybe some recovery or some survival of small populations. Again, that's going to be multiple generations to build in some genetic resilience. But in the moment, it's not a bad idea to try, as long as you're working in partnership with the state wildlife agency, collecting the data and hoping that that gives us some more information about what's possible.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do any of you incorporate dark sky curriculum in your outreach? Yes, Amanda.
I have no idea what that is. So maybe the question person could clarify?
I would assume it's like the sea turtle where they're getting rid of artificial lighting to screws up a lot of natural behaviors.
Right.
Yeah, it's like light pollution and dark skies and
I see.
Pollution that affects bird migration and bat migration.
Got it. I don't have anything to offer on that, so sorry.
Well, I'll put a plug in. The National Museum of Natural History here in Washington, DC actually has a dark skies exhibit. So if anybody's coming through DC, for like vacation, they have a wonderful dark skies exhibit. They talk a little bit about birds and, again, light pollution, but also just for humans. The idea that, we don't get to see dark skies anymore because we're just surrounded by light, but for migratory animals, including bats. So I would refer you to the Museum of Natural History in DC as one example.
Okay, thank you. Next question for the panel. Has anyone looked at or studied LED lighting and radio frequency disturbance/interference with bats? In 2017, we noticed a disappearance of bats on our place that seemed to correlate with our electric coop upgrading our acreage yard light from a sodium vapor light to an LED. In 2019, we had a utility remove the light and noticed bats return to our acreage shortly thereafter. Since LED is or are no to emit FRF, I thought this might have been related. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I would have a hard time distinguishing that from just the amount of light that it's putting out. It's hard to say what about that might have altered things if it was a significant alteration.
I'm curious, are bugs attracted to LED lights like they're attracted to incandescent? Because that's where you're going to find the bats at night. They're going to be flying around the street lights that are attracting the flying insects, right? And I don't know enough about LED lights to know or have seen whether bugs are flying around them as well, because they're they're not emitting heat as much as just the light, right? So that's why I thought maybe if they're cooler lighting surfaces, maybe you don't get as many bugs.
Okay, thank you. Amanda?
That's actually a really good point. I've never noticed if bugs are attracted to LEDs or not. We do use LEDs in our facility, basically everywhere, and I've never seen bats act any way other than normal with the use of LEDs. So I would tend to think, with what Dr. Klein said, that it could be insects. It could be the insects are just not attracted to LEDs, but that would be a pretty neat study.
Okay, thank you. Next question for the panel. What are some tips or general recommendations on how to count/observe your bats when you have a large colony all living together? So Amanda.
Well, the way that we manage, because we do have several hundred of all different species in the same flight enclosure. We have Egyptian fruit bats, African fruit bats, Jamaicans, short tails, and flying foxes. So we do cursory exams twice a day, just a visual exam of all of the colony. We also give treats to all of the these. I'm talking fruit bats right now, not our not the insectivorous bats. They also do get a lot of hands-on and visual cursory exams. But you can look for aberrant behavior or anything that might be amiss. We give treats to bats, whichever bats will take it, both morning and night. That's fruit bats, and that also tells us who may or may not be doing so well. And then again, if we do see a bat that's not doing well, we can pull him, mark him with a special non-toxic tattoo paste or something like that. Treat whatever ailment there is. If it's something we need to treat daily and he's in good enough shape, we'll let him go back to the colony and just take care of him every day according to the mark. And then if it's somebody who needs to be pulled because they need special care and placed in a smaller enclosure, then we can do that as well. But we'd like to manage them as a whole because they're happier together, of course, rather than being separated, and then being in a colony and just establishing all of the their psychological needs is basically keeps them healthy. Any bat that does have to be pulled and isolated, we still try to keep that isolation enclosure pretty close to the main colony, so that way they can still hear and see the other bats as well, and still feel like they're part of the colony.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
Go ahead.
agree pretty. I think it's pretty important to have a keeper staff who knows the animals and can keep track, knows how they should be acting and can pick up health problems early. Because otherwise, if you're just to a point where you see 100 bats and then you end up just picking the dead ones off the floor because nobody's picked up anything early. So it's yeah, you need a sufficient staff to be able to keep track of everybody.
Okay, thank you. Annalise?
Yeah, I mean, at Luby, we aren't dealing with that many animals in one habitat, but we do have some that I agree with Amanda, kind of having those treats and things that creating those relationships that who's going to come for them. And a lot of them are going to, oh, well, he got a treat if he walked over there. So if I go over there, I get a treat. And through that, you end up creating these bonds with the animals, whether that's with an individual or with the group. But that can allow you to be like, hey, that one that always comes over doesn't, kind of like Dr. Wellahan said, that's where you can identify those changes earlier. But I do think that it is, while we want these animals to exhibit their natural behaviors and not be every part of their day interacting with us, that there are those certain parts that are important to make sure that we're able to tell when there is an issue, and creating some level of those bonds and trust with those animals is very important to their daily care.
Okay, thank you. Lori, you have a hand up?
I do. Just it sounds like having well-trained employees is really key to this particular question. I see Jim nodding his head, and I'm curious to know if you have the smaller species of bats that tend to cluster together, and there's a lot of them. How is there, I don't know if there's a way you could describe it. How would someone go about really being able to evaluate the individuals in that situation? Or do you look at the group as a whole? What would be your strategy for taking a look at a large clump of bats?
Well, we have several large clumps that we deal with on a daily basis. And the roost that they have are it's a roosting area that we always take care of first. So we can basically let them go to sleep and get out of their way. We use headlamps because it's a little darker under their roost. We look at every single bat every single day. And that is a cursory exam. That's not taking them down and, actually looking over them and causing them stress. But it's easy to tell. It's just, especially as everyone's pointed out, having a staff that knows these animals is like paramount in making sure they get the care that they need. So we're very extremely lucky. We have 4 caregivers that live on site. So in the event of anything going wrong, they can be here immediately. But every one of those caregivers knows the bats. Some of the bats have names because they have different personalities. They come out. As Annalise pointed out, they'll come out for different treats. And so, they get they said, oh, little Bucko came over for a treat today or something, so they know that Bucko needs to show up every single day for a treat. And if he doesn't, then something's wrong. Let's find Bucko. So, so the bats that interact with you are, of course, just make it that much easier to find out if something's wrong. But as a clump, we just basically look at every individual. I mean, just a small, because they're in a small little group. So, so just kind of casually looking through at every single one of them with your headlamp, you're going to be able to tell quite a bit. We also do take pictures and we use a flash. So taking a picture occasionally and looking at that photo, you can find if something's wrong. You can look at every single bat in the photograph and tell if something's going wrong. But the easiest way to tell is when they self-isolate, because that's when they're in trouble. That's when we need to intervene and collect them and see what's wrong. So that's the easiest way to tell.
Okay, thank you. Patrice?
Yeah, just a quick, I think actually Amanda probably already answered my question, but also a lot of times you're using these video cams, whether it's for the public to watch them, off to the side or remotely, but also as long as you've got cameras on these guys, if you can get some, really clear pictures, you can actually watch their movements, right, when they're not people that are disturbing them, and also maybe get another insight that way. But just sort of remote cameras kind of come in.
Okay, thank you. Heidi? I think you're muted, Heidi.
She's not.
We're not hearing you, Heidi. I'm sorry.
It looks like you're muted, Heidi. You want to try to unmute again?
She's muted now. Try unmuting again, Heidi, see if it works this time.
No, sorry.
No, we're not hearing you. Sorry. Yeah, we'll just go ahead. Okay, next question for the panel. What is the best practice for keeping track of births / recording hatch events for large bat colonies?
Z over here, could you repeat that, please?
Sure. What is the best practice for keeping track of births and recording hatch events for large bat colonies?
I think I can answer that. We do neuter all of the males that come in. We also rescue pregnant females occasionally. And when that happens, they're kept in a separate enclosure until their pups are born. Then we can assess the sex. And if it's a female, she can go into the active or the general population right away. If she has a boy, then mom and pup will stay together in a special enclosure. And then when the time comes, he can be neutered and then they can join the colony. We definitely don't want or have active births here. We try desperately to prevent that. Occasionally, there may be an accident with a bat we've rescued and we don't know she's pregnant, but as soon as we find out, then she's removed and placed into the quarantine or the enclosure where we can watch and monitor and see what sex her baby is. And of course, no bat is put into the enclosure to await the birth of a baby or neutering alone. If we do rescue a bat that needs to be neutered, then he's placed in that enclosure with another neutered male. And that enclosure is fairly within hearing distance of the active colony. So they know they have something to look forward to. A lot of these guys came from a bird cage. So getting them out of that situation and getting them neutered and getting them with a social active colony as quick as possible is something we try to do.
Yes,
So,
Brian.
We do breed 2 species here, our Malaysians, and then the variable flying foxes, and it's based on breeding and transfer plans for those species. So I'm actually in the AZA. I'm not only chair of the bat tag, but I'm the species survival plan coordinator for VAMPs and hypos. So we work with population geneticists ever since these bats have been at Luby. My predecessors have very good records. So whenever I work with a population biologist at the Lincoln Park Zoo and their population management center, they literally just give me an Excel sheet based on the genetic matches, which would work the best. So whenever we do put breeding groups together, we know to maintain high genetic variability, which male we can put with which group of females. So we plan our births. So basically just a few months later, Annalise and Dr. Wellahan will get together and we will do ultrasounds on our bats, and we'll be able to tell, which ones are pregnant. If we have twins, do we need to provide the mother with calcium supplements and feeding supplements? But we're lucky to have a very good keeping staff, vet staff, and we're on it. We watch it very closely whenever we do put breeding groups together. And then we eventually do pull the males. And I'll say this, with here in the Northern Hemisphere, we know that they really go into their breeding behaviors around August, right around mid-August. So we usually put breeding groups together in September and October. And it seems that they kind of wait a while. The females don't get pregnant for a while, but we're talking gestations about 5 to 6 months, depending on the species. So we can kind of pinpoint it, but really what it comes down to is Dr. Wellahan and his staff coming out. We have the vets come out every other Tuesday, and we'll do ultrasounds to see, are they pregnant? How far along are they? And then just act accordingly for there.
Okay, thank you. Next question for the panel. What needs to be considered when using a bat for educational purposes? Yes, Amanda.
The main thing that needs to be considered is the bat's individual personality and whether or not he's going to be relaxed enough for the program. The last thing you want to do, well, you want to use a bat that will easily take a mealworm or a piece of melon or whatever treat you want to give them and just be relaxed and eat that, and then looking for another one. So just that he's kind of animated and relaxed during the program. That shows the true beauty of a bat to viewers, and it shows them, that bats are wonderful, gentle animals. The last thing you want to do is use a bat that does not want to be there, one that struggles in your hand with nips or bites or just basically looks bad, because not only does it not do any service to bats as a whole, it makes the handler look bad by showing a bat that doesn't want to be shown. People are going to be focused on the fact that that bat is struggling to get away, rather than watching it eat a mealworm and learning about insect control or pollinating fruit or spreading the seeds of fruit, etc. So it all boils down to individual personalities. You can have the same 2 bats in captivity for several years, and one will be a complete little jerk, and the other one will just love to be, get treats and be shown to the public. So you basically have to look for the individual personalities and just go from there.
Okay, thank you. Annalise?
Yeah, basically the same thing that Amanda said, is making sure that you are choosing those right individuals. I know we have Sunshine, our little golden mantled flying fox, that we use a lot on our outreaches. He was hand reared, which definitely plays into helping him be comfortable around people. He does not mind being around people. We put him in his outreach box and he eats for a little bit and then he just goes to sleep in the corner and just looks so content. And I agree that that does definitely help with when people are looking at them, that again, they're not scared of it. They're not seeing a stressed out animal. And it very much does come down to knowing your individuals and knowing which ones are going to be good for it and which ones aren't. And not trying to force an animal that isn't going to be a good fit to be the right fit. And having that ability to choose between individuals definitely makes a difference. Because like I said, Sunshine, he's amazing. He just goes out, he does not care, he loves it, he loves the people, he loves all the extra treats that he gets. But there's definitely individuals that if you pulled them from the group and stuff like that, that they would definitely not enjoy it. So very much individual based.
All right, thank you very much to all of our panelists. We appreciate your time in coming out and presenting for us today. You guys definitely gave us a wealth of knowledge.